So the key takeaway is to be really intentional with your reporting. Take time to get a pen and paper if you can. Work out who your reports are for, what the questions you're trying to ask, and then look at the metrics as the very last thing, making sure you've run them through these filters. Then you're getting yourself a report that allows for really meaningful action on what matters most to you. I'm Katie New, and this is SEO in 2026 Additional Insights.
Katie, what's your number one SEO tip for 2026?
My number one SEO tip for 2026 is to report on the metrics that actually matter to you. So this is about moving away slightly from historical metrics or vanity metrics that we might be reporting on. There's still a space for them, but it's about thinking about being intentional with your reporting. So really tuning in to what is meaningful for your business, for your website. We tend to have this thought that there are so many reports that we can do. We have so many tools, so much data now. But it's how can we cut out all of the noise and begin to create a set of reports that can drive meaningful action for our business. So there's a few ways that we can do this. I really like the old school way of grabbing a pen and paper and starting to think about how we can jot down, working backwards, all the way from who's going to be seeing our reports to lastly ending up with the metrics and making the metrics almost the last thing that you identify when thinking about your reporting.
Yeah, great piece of advice there, because when you started off talking about the metrics that matter to you, I guess I was initially concerned because it's very easy to select metrics that appeal to you or you think might be relevant or interesting, but not necessarily appropriate and relatable to the business. But I mean, you certainly clarified that as well. But there's so many different metrics out there that you can focus on. How do you really know that you have selected the right metric?
So my process for doing this, like I said, I'm still a pen and paper girl at heart. I like to just get my notebook, get my pen, and I start with the question of firstly, who is this report for? So starting to think who's going to be reading this report? What questions do they have about performance or about user behavior? Trying to figure out exactly what the core question of that report is. Who's going to be viewing it? Is it somebody who's in an SEO team? Is it somebody who's a brand manager for a particular product? Working out who it's for. Once we know that, we can work backwards from there. So maybe they've identified in the first step that it's somebody on a marketing team and they're trying to see how much their marketing channel contributes to revenue and sales. So then the questions they're going to be asking are which channels are contributing and how is that journey looking for a user who might be using a website or an app. So we then take it back from who the report's for to the behaviors that they want people to take. So then we can identify a list of things such as maybe it's people adding a product to cart. Perhaps it's people who are clicking on users also buy. Maybe it's people going through the different steps of the checkout. We want to identify those really important behaviors that contribute to this main question of how and which marketing channels are affecting sales. And then we go on to take it to the metrics finally. And this should almost be the last thing that you look at. Once you know who the report's for, what questions they're asking, what behaviors need to happen on the site to draw into those questions, then we can look at metrics. So then that's when you can think, does bounce rate, for example, is one that comes up all the time. Does that actually show something meaningful and useful in this context of who's seeing the report, what questions it's asking? And quite often the answer is no, that's not actually meaningful for what we're trying to get out of this report. In which case you say that's just noise and we can cut that one out. So it's really thinking about every metric you put into a report and not putting any metrics in until you've put it through those filters of who's the report for, what are we asking, what behaviors do we want information on.
Okay. As a starting point, it might be useful just to give a few examples of reports of metrics that tend to be more appropriate nowadays in 2026 for different job titles, perhaps? Because I mean, you mentioned brand manager there as well. Maybe we could give a couple of other job titles as examples and the types of metrics that you tend to advise that job title to focus on.
Yeah. So we work with quite a few clients who have a range of jobs. So quite a lot of time we're working with someone whose job is in SEO, in-house in a company, but they need, a little bit of extra tracking support. So what they're going to want from a report is going to be very different than somebody who's in marketing, because somebody who's in SEO, they're focusing specifically on the channels they're working on. So it might be organic sort of traffic. Whereas if we're looking at somebody who's on the social team or somebody who's on the paid team, all three of those reports looks very different, whether you're looking at social or paid or organic searches. We also might have somebody who's not actually in digital marketing at all. So you have those main sort of stakeholder reports where they want to know how things are working across different markets, in which case that needs to be a very different report where we're not adding in all of the detail about individual campaigns. That needs to give an overall review. So I think that's one of the key aspects here about creating intentional reports. It's really talking to each of those people about what do you need to see on the daily or what do you need to see each month. You can maybe perhaps give them a report based on your discussions, but always saying this is a report that needs to be evolved. So next time you go through it, tell me which bits you skim through and you ignore. Tell me which bits just feel like noise to you. Tell me which bits you don't understand. And then you can really begin to make it more concise and work out exactly what reporting is useful to everyone. And that sort of goes into how we define success in this. So success is when somebody is not skimming through the report. They get it in their inbox once a month and they think, I'll have a quick look through, but I'm not going to go too much into detail. Success is when every single metric means something to the person who opens the report and then drives them to make meaningful action based on the reporting that's there. So I think this whole thing is about talking to the person who's on the receiving end of the report, working with them to evolve it to make sure every single metric has a purpose there and that it's useful to them, and then making sure that that is what can begin to drive some change.
And what do you do if you feel that the person that you're talking to aren't interested in the metrics that you feel are most beneficial to them?
Yes. So reports, I get very excited about reports, but I also understand that not everybody feels the same way. I think when you have somebody who's maybe not feeling so interested about the reporting, it's often due to a barrier of them understanding exactly what it's showing. Is it a context piece, really? Because if you're reading through the reports and you see, you see a bounce rate that has gone up or it's gone down, but you don't really know what exactly that means in terms of the context of your website, then that's not interesting to somebody because they don't know what they need to do with that. So I think a really important piece around reporting is an educational piece with the person who's receiving that report, taking the time to go through each of the metrics and think about it in the context. So if we take the bounce rate example, if we have bounce rate for the whole site, if it goes up, then you might think, oh, this is a problem. Lots more people are beginning to bounce away from the site. But it may be that the website has actually just had a layout change. And the whole point is that they're trying to get people to move through the website quicker to then click off to make another action, whether it's to phone them or to go to a different payment place. So I think it's really important to be able to explain what the context of each of those metrics is for the website that somebody is doing their reporting for, and make sure they understand why we need to look at these metrics and what it means if it goes up, what it means if it goes down, and how they need to take action based on. It's all about the understanding, and that's when it gets exciting, because unless you know what to do with it, it can be a little bit dull just looking at a page of numbers, really.
You mentioned bounce rate a couple of times there. And you also talk about default metrics that you shouldn't necessarily focus on. What are example of a couple of default metrics that you see marketers or people within our organizations focusing on that you wish they should stop focusing on, and you'd recommend any other analytics professional to or SEO professional to try and encourage these people to stop focusing on them?
So it's probably no surprise I'm going to say bounce rate. It's one that almost every client we work with, you ask what sort of things they currently track or they want to track, and bounce rate is always there. I do think it's important, but as long as it's really been talked about the context of whether you're using it site-wide and if that makes sense, or whether you're using it just for a specific page, or whether you're using it to track a change in a page. Other ones we see quite a lot that I think, again, are so dependent on the context of each website is session duration. We see people often want to report on that, keyword rankings and traffic. Now, all of these I do believe are important metrics. But again, it's putting it through those filters of who's going to see the report, what is the question they're asking, what behaviors are we specifically looking at on the website. Because session duration doesn't mean much if you don't have a question that you're asking specifically around session duration, or if that doesn't tie into your goals. Again, bounce rate site-wide might not mean anything, but bounce rate on one specific page that is going through a lot of change is really important. So it's just putting them through that lens of questioning as to whether they need to be in the report.
What about software? GA4 is possibly the most popular kind of tracking software at the moment. I'm not sure in terms of providing reports as well. What software do you favor in terms of providing reports and perhaps even tracking as well?
Yeah, so I believe that data is getting more and more complicated as time goes on. So there are so many different ways. So obviously you have the sort of typical GA4 setup where you can either get the reporting from there or bring it into Looker. We also have now BigQuery and server-side tracking and Google Tag Manager. So there are so many ways that you can collect the data. And I guess for each business, it depends on what capabilities they have, because the great thing about GA4 is that it's free and it's fairly kind of user-friendly, depending on who you speak to. If you have more capability, being able to use things like BigQuery and server-side tracking can really help you to increase what you're able to see and how you're able to explore the data that you have available. For us, I've got a really big soft spot for bringing all of my reporting together in Looker. I could spend hours making my reports look user-friendly and that tell a story through the data. So I find that's a really nice way to be able to share the data with our clients once we've focused on getting accurate tracking set up and all of that. But I think it's really nice to be able to present it in a visual way that makes sense to people.
How often do you review the metrics that you should be tracking? Because with different channels, with different user behavior, perhaps users going off-site now to consume content, there are perhaps other metrics that are more relevant nowadays than perhaps a year ago, and the same as time goes by, obviously things constantly change. So how often do you review these metrics, and maybe what's an example of a metric that you've changed because of user behavior?
Yeah, I think it's a really important one because things move so fast now. Although the premise is still the same, that we want that good quality content, the channels it's coming through is so different, like you said, David. We've seen a big shift recently in wanting to report on AI. So a lot of our reporting has changed to include that visibility of traffic that's coming in from AI sources. And that's something that has been really important for us to make sure we review what's in our reports and not just stick to the channels that were already there and have been there for, historical reasons, where we have our classic organic search and paid. It's been really important to actually move with the times and assess, is this report still answering the core questions? And until we added in the AI channel, it wasn't watching what the question was, which is, where is our traffic coming from? Because we needed to bring in that new channel. So it's really important to regularly check, asking your clients firstly, is this report still giving you what you need? But also proactively saying, we think you're missing something in your reporting here. We want to make sure that you have visibility of this metric, which now has come into play and is really important for you.
You talked about telling a story through the data, through the metrics that you see as well, and maybe spending hours on formulating this for a client. Do you not want to get to a stage where the reporting's set up and it's automatically generated, and you're perhaps even using AI to tell the story, and you don't have so much manual input into the creation of these reports?
Yeah, I want both, really. I think that's really important to automate where we can and use the tools available to begin to automate that storytelling a bit. But of course, there is context that we have from our discussions with clients, and there's context that people who are within the business whose website we're looking at that needs to be brought into this assessment. So I think combining the two is the sweet spot, really, is having as much generated as we can, which then gives us the time to really run through the reporting with the client and say, okay, from this, what action needs to be taken based on what you know about your business, what I can see from your data and from this report that we've already got. I think the storytelling is so key, though, because numbers mean nothing if you don't understand what they're trying to tell you. So I think it's so important that we take that time to dive into the data and say, what is the story that it's telling us here, rather than it just being a list of upwards arrows and downwards arrows.
Katie, what's the key takeaway from the tip you shared today?
So the key takeaway is to be really intentional with your reporting. Take time to get a pen and paper if you can. Work out who your reports are for, what the questions you're trying to ask, and then look at the metrics as the very last thing, making sure you've run them through these filters. Then you're getting yourself a report that allows for really meaningful action on what matters most to you.
Katie New is Data and Analytics Manager at Varn. Find out more over at varn.co.uk. Katie, thanks so much for being part of SEO in 2026.
Thank you so much, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. Get your copy of SEO in 2026, the book, over at seoin2026.com.